So this is how we end up with this combination now of, kind of having these ghosts and spirits and the veil thinning. It truly is more of a Christian belief than it is a pagan belief. And while now like I say, neo-pagans and Wiccans, and they've kind of, brought this in as the given, going back to the actual, from what we can gather through our evidence and study, there was nothing to say that they were celebrating this. Now, as we get a little bit further into it, we start to see, obviously, now we have the tradition of carving a pumpkin, right? It was turnips back then, right? So there was no pumpkin carving. Yeah, they were turnips, right? So if you know what a turnip's like, you can imagine how hard it is to carve a turnip. All right? So could you imagine trying to carve a turnip? Yeah.
No, I think I'll pass on that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they're pretty woody at the best of times and pretty tough, but that was a common root vegetable then. Pumpkins are something that came from the West, right? They were part of the squash family that indigenous people were growing that were not in Europe. Europe didn't have them. Nowhere had them until we had that exchange of European invaders and taking back things like tomatoes and squash and potatoes and all of these things to the old world, as they like to call it, from the new world. But I find it interesting that turnips were sort of lit in the term. They were carved out.
I never knew that.
Yeah, and there's also too sort of a, we're trying to figure out some old small fragments of these things have been found, but there's nothing to say that they were carving faces in them, right? So again, that comes later on, but they were lighting turnips and they were putting, a source of fire inside the turnip and placing them outside the door. And at the time, it really, what that was an invitation for the living to visit and to share food with each other. So it didn't really have anything to do, again, with death. Oh. It was about eating and sharing and preparing for the winter. And
coming back to the celebration of the harvest.
That's right, coming back to that celebration of the harvest. So,
right.
Historically, it really is. It's taken on a new life in a sense, right? That this was a time of the year when the cattle were brought back from the summer pastures. They usually sent the cattle and sheep would go to the highlands over the summer. And they would graze there, and they would, and then come this time of year, they would bring the cattle back to the lowlands because it was less harsh, and also because you needed to slaughter them for food. So it was that time where they spent the summer eating and fattening up, and for the purpose of us to consume. So it really is around food and the celebration of food. And until we get that Christianity creeping in, there's nothing to really show us that it was anything outside of that, weirdly enough. I hate to say it, all you neo-pagans and Wiccans who believe that it was all about conjuring up the dead. There's nothing to prove that, at this point. Right? But it doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means that we can't find any viable proof to show that these things happened. There's, stories, word of mouth, but it's been thousands of years. And so it's very hard for us to find any real truth in those things. It doesn't mean it didn't happen, But at this point, everything really does point to the harvest, right? It does point to that. But that being said, let's fast forward like another 1,000 years. Let's move into the era of Christianity, when Christianity's wheel rolled over pretty much everybody, right? And it didn't matter what the culture was. They would roll in and preach the gospel, and it is what it is. I'm not going to say it's good or bad. I think it was bad in many cases, but it had its influence and it really stuck. And of course, so then you now start to see the combination of Christian beliefs, which again, a lot are borrowed from pagan beliefs, country people throughout Europe. And so now we're starting to see some of that Eastern belief carried into, I guess if we want to call it West, it's not really West per se, but let's say England, Scotland, Wales, those areas. And so now it's bringing with it Christian beliefs, and now Christian influence is beginning to creep into this Samhain, celebration. And we're now seeing things like All Saints Day on November 1st, right? Where we're now celebrating the saints. And then we're seeing Devil's Night attached to it, which is October 30th.
Right.
Now,
right.
Pre-Christianity, there may have been some beliefs that, there were creatures or demons or whatever you want to call them. I really don't think that there were in the same way as when Christianity came in. But that's my opinion, and just from studying over the years, Christianity changed a lot about the holiday, a lot about the celebration, and made it more in terms of the church. So I think that as we go, we start to see it change from a harvest festival to a still somewhat harvest-related festival, to bringing in the passing of the souls, the ancestor celebration, the All Saints, the Devil's Night, and it starts to go into a big old cauldron and get stirred around, for several hundreds of years, and starts to come out to what we kind of know today as Halloween. Right? But as it got to the U.S., when people left places like England and Scotland and Ireland, and they came over to the colonies, they brought some of those beliefs with them. And I think our real modern version of Halloween we can thank the Americans for, because that was really where it kicked off, right? It was in the United States. And and not until really the Victorian era, because the Victorians, they loved anything macabre, right? So it was an excuse now to start looking at that. And I think the idea of the trick-or-treating and the costuming still goes back to some parts of the old festivals where people were mumming and guising. And, so they were putting on a disguise and they were reciting verses in exchange for food. So the food is still there, right? We still get that. And in some terms, that's considered like the Celtic New Year, right? So we have a lot to look at in terms of, what happens. So we have Devil's Night, we have Halloween, we have All Saints Day, and then we have All Souls Day. So it's really almost a 4-day celebration if you're celebrating all of it. For the most part over here, we really only celebrate Halloween, right? I mean, that seems to be it. But do you guys have any old stories that you may have been told about the origins of Halloween? I mean, it's, I don't think it's really cut and dry. I think it depends on who you go to. And, their stories kind of vary, but were you guys ever told anything growing up, or no, just kind of Halloween?
Yeah, not really. Just, Halloween. As I say, as a kid, it was all about trick-or-treating and dressing up, and it was all about going and getting candy. I had no idea what the historical observances were, of course, back then. So, no.
Yeah, it's kind of that interesting, even for myself. I mean, I was, like I said, I kind of had the pretty much North American Halloween. And until I was, going to school and studying archaeology and anthropology, that I really realized that it was like, oh, this is really pretty new. Like in terms of how we celebrate it, right? It's only a few hundred years old, if that. And so it's still kind of a new, I guess, in the grand scheme of time. Over thousands of years, right? Yeah. I mean, 200 years might be a lifetime and then some to many people, but
the funny thing, I think it's been great to start, to keep memories with, and we have lots of fun memories of dressing up my own children in goofy little costumes. My daughters absolutely loved Elsa and Anna from Frozen, and wore that one year. And what was it? Oh, yes, they liked, my daughter one last year, I think it was, dressed up as a broken doll, like an old ceramic porcelain doll with cracks in her makeup, like so that the skin looked cracked, which I absolutely love. She actually had a key. She even went so far as to have a key in her bag. To make out the appearance that it was a wind-up doll.
Right.
I loved it. I really love the effort that some people put into these costumes. I think it's fantastic. And I think it's also about family time, spending time as a family to make these costumes, or, to go trick-or-treating from house to house with the kids. I think that's been great. I loved it over the years. When my children were much younger, we took them to nursing homes who wouldn't get a lot of visitors, and we take the children in their costumes, and the residents at the local nursing homes really love seeing the children all dressed up, and really enjoyed giving them candy and talking and things, and it was great. It's just a fantastic memory. So I'm glad it's given us a lot of memories over the years, and still continues to do so. Every year by the decorations. But back in England, we did apple bobbing, and I don't see any apple bobbing here in the States.
They did. When I was a kid, we had, if we went to someone's Halloween party, it was always part of the celebration. Right. But I think nowadays, just with all of the, the hygiene and all of those kinds of things, and I'm not even talking about, COVID, it's just, I think it's become one of those things that just doesn't seem hygienic,
No.
Kids sticking their faces into bowls of water and half drowning themselves trying to get an apple, right? But again, that likely ties to, I just want to read something here because I think that it's important. Okay. I can't remember all of these details, so I want to read it because I think it's important to know. In reality, we seem to keep going back to the Irish for this celebration, right, for Samhain. Okay. And it's because it was one of the 4 main festivals on their Celtic calendar. So it marked the end of harvest and the beginning of winter. And so the customs were mentioned in several medieval texts. And of course, when we get into medieval texts, we're already into a period of Christianity. But because it was an oral culture, this has supposedly been passed down and written down by monks. So, we cross our fingers and hope they didn't change it that much. But it was said that there was a festival of Yulid, and it was Samhain, and it lasted an entire week. So Samhain itself was 3 days before and 3 days after. It involved gatherings where they held meetings, they feasted, they drank alcohol, they held contests. They also recorded horse racing as part of their festivities, and there were bonfires lit and stones cast into the fires. It was mentioned in Geoffrey Keating's book